All right, I will say good morning, a guten chodesh. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nissan. Haba Alinu Litova. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack. Wow, Paul and Kathy Pollack again. We thank the Pollack so much, Baruch Hashem. Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's mother and father, Shmuel ben Zechariah, and Sarah bas Avrohom. To thank Avraham and Shaindy Kelman for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in memory of Bernice Kelman, Sarah Bryna bas Yehoshua Heschel. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Goldberg, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his father, Mordechai ben Lippman Leib, Zechariah, and Jack and Bette Gladstein in memory of Bette's father, Gedalia ben Aharon Tzvi HaLevi. We also thank Saeed and Sima Haken for dedicating the Daf today in honor of the birth of a granddaughter, of a baby girl, to their children, Daniel and Orli Rosenthal. Mazel tov, shebizocha legadol TORAH, lechuppah, ulemaisim tovim. Incredible. So with that, let us begin. So you have a really incredible daf ahead of us today. Fascinating daf with a lot of great halacha, even some great hashkafa, and of course, as always, too little time. All right, so with that, let's begin. Today's daf is Nun Tes 59. We are picking up in Yahrzeit Hashem at Nun Chesem base 58b at the 2 dots, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. Amar Rav. Rav said as follows. So we'll say this is now it's not a tangent, but because we've already been speaking about the concept of hakafas kol harosh, or hakafas harosh, right, cutting the sides of the head. So this now becomes a natural extension. Amar Rav, mekel adam kol gufo betar. Rav said a man is permitted to shave his entire body with a razor. Now I will say, what's the issue over here? In other words, what exactly is it that Rav is discussing? So I'll say, if you take a look, we can look at Rashi and the Rush. So Rashi says over here, Rashi is the first white line on the bottom. Ve'ein bo mishum lo yilbash kever simlas isha. They both say there's a concept, there's an issur d'oraisa of cross-dressing. Again, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But the Torah says a man is not permitted to wear women's clothing. A man is not permitted to wear women's clothing. They'll look at the Rush. So the Rush says over here, Amarav mekel adam kol gufo betar afilu beis hashechi ubeis ha'erva. They also, when we say that a man could shave his entire body with a razor, so what are we talking about? Even the armpits and even the pubic area. Ve'ein bazeh mishum lo yilbash kever simlas isha. And ultimately, once again, Rashi says there is no prohibition of a man wearing women's clothing. In other words, what Rav is saying is like this: the concept of lo yilbash kever simlas isha, that a man should not wear women's clothing, literally translated, is not just a din in wardrobe. That's the way the Gemara is. It's not just din in wardrobe. It's an idea that a man is not permitted to engage in that which is considered uniquely feminine practices. So one might have thought that hair removal from the body ultimately is considered to be a feminine practice. Rav is coming along and saying, it's not. Finish the Rush. He says, Zakin v'rosh lo ayri Rav, ella b'shargov. And I will say, the Rush just adds this in, although we knew it. When Rav talks about shaving the entire body, what is he not talking about? He's not talking about the beard and the sides of the head, right? Because remember, again, with the beard and the sides of the head, obviously, again, in that situation, you have a totally different issur d'oraisa, right? But Lamaisi is talking about everything besides the beard and the head. Fine. So we'll say this is the position of Rav. So Gemara says, really? Meisvei hamavir beis hashachia beis ha'erva. If a man removes hair from his armpits, and from the pubic area, harei zeloka, you get malchus for that. So generally, malchus is not a sign of positive encouragement, right? So generally, if you're getting malchus, that generally means you're doing something wrong. So what's going on over here? There's a direct contradiction to Rav, to which the Gemara says, it's not a contradiction. Habitar habamisparayim. We'll say one is talking about the case of shaving with a razor, and one is talking about with scissors. So when you shave with a razor, that you'll get malchus for. When you quote unquote shave or cut with scissors, that you won't get malchus for. And I will say now, what is the fundamental distinction? So ultimately, again, I will say the idea would be that removal with a razor, of course, is an absolute hair removal. So apparently, again, the Gemara is suggesting that would be a violation of lo yilbash gever simlas isha. That a man cannot wear women's clothing. That's a feminine practice. When you cut with scissors, again, scissors is only so close you're going to get to the skin. That's not considered to be a feminine practice, and therefore that would be permitted. That seems to be the case of Rav. The Gemara says, really? But 1 second, Rav will say, but Bepashtos, Rav said, Mekel Adam Kol Gufo Betar. Right? Rav said you're allowed to use a razor. So how can you tell me now that Rav's talking about a case where you're cutting the hair with scissors when Rav himself explicitly says that it's a razor? To which the Gemara says, no, ke'ein tar. Rav means that you're using scissors like a razor. I will say, what does that mean? So again, if you look at the Rush, ke'ein tar, b'misparayim samok labasar. So I will say, when you use scissors, you can use scissors in different ways, right? You could use the scissors and cut the hair at a height, so to speak, or you could use scissors right against the skin. So when Rav says that you could shave, a man could shave his entire body with a razor, he doesn't really mean a razor. Rather, he means with scissors, but scissors like a razor, i.e., you're cutting the hair right at the skin line. Okay, so it says the Gemara as follows. So we'll say, so just before we go on, it turns out that what Rav is telling me is like this, that a man is permitted to cut the hair on his body, not with a razor. Not with a razor. Ultimately, again, not with a razor, but rather with the scissors. He can cut with scissors, and he can even cut with scissors very close to the skin. But it appears, based on Rav, that if a man were to use a razor on his body, and the specific areas of interest over here are the armpits and the pubic area, halacha l'maaseh, that would be a violation. It sounds like, according to Rav, it would even be a violation of an isur d'oraisa. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, we're not finished. Rabbi Yochanan, Hamavir Beis HaShechi Beis HaErva. Rabbi Yochanan says if a man shaves the hair, Beis HaShechi, again, his armpits, Beis HaErva, pubic area. Loke, you get Malchus. The rest is really Meisvei. Havaras Se'ar, Eina Medivrei Torah, Ela Medivrei Sofrim. You have another Brysa, and the other Brysa says that for a man to engage in hair removal, right? So for a man to engage in hair removal, ultimately, again, that is not an Isser D'Oraisa, rather it is only an Isser D'Rabanan. So if it's an Isser D'Rabanan, why are you getting Malchus? To which the Gemara says, no, my loke de Kamar Midrabanan. They both say there is a concept of Malchus Mardus. Malchus Mardus means that Chazal instituted Malchus when you violated the Rabbanan. So I will say, so now interestingly enough, according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you go ahead and you remove hair, man removes hair from the pubic area or from his armpits, that is an Isser D'Rabbanan. Now again, there are different levels of severity with an Isser D'Rabbanan. Obviously, if Chazal felt that you need to impose Malchus, that means that Chazal felt pretty strongly on this. So you'll get Malchus for hair removal. A man will get Malchus for hair removal. Fine. So Mar says, top of the Nuntes, Ikeda Amri, an alternate version of this. Amr Rabbi Chibar Abba, Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Hamavir Beis HaShechi or Beis HaErva. If a man removes hair from the Beis HaShechi, Beis HaErva, right, armpits, pubic area, Loke Mishum Lo Yilbash Geber Simlas Isha. So we'll say, now what's the contradiction here? What's the contradiction? So the Bryce is agreeing, you'll get Malchus. But why does the Bryce say you'll get Malchus? Why? Because you're over on the Lav, which I will say sounds like, what's the nature of this prohibition? Now, sounds like, say what is the Bryce saying? What is it? It's a Daraisa. So it's a contradiction, right? Remember again, Rabbi Yochanan was saying before, hair removal is an Isser D'Rabbanan. The Bryce is saying now that hair removal is an Isser D'Oraisa. So what's going on over here? The Gemara says, good. I'm sorry. I just lost the place. Meisvei havara se'ar eina element divrei Torah element divrei Sofrim. So I just want to point out, remember, this is an Ikeda Amri. So this is an alternate version of the previous discussion. So in this discussion over here, you have Rav Chia bar Abba saying that hair removal is an Isur D'Oraisa. Okay, now in this alternate version, the Gemara brings a kasha, a meisvei, and now Rabbi say the Brisa says, havara se'ar eina medivrei Torah ela medivrei Sofrim. And here it says again, hair removal is not D'Oraisa, rather it's only D'Rabbanan. So we'll say, now that Brisa is contradicting Rav Chia bar Abba. So what's going on over here? Hu da'amar kiyai tana. It's not a contradiction. We'll say it's machlokes tanaim. And Rav Chia bar Abba holds like the following Tanya. Listen to this. The following Tana. The Sanya, this is fascinating. Hamavir beis hashechi or beis ha'erva. If a man removes hair right from his armpits or his pubic area, hareza over mishum lo yilbash kever simlas isha. He's in violation of an Isur D'Oraisa. Okay? Violation of the Isser of a man should not wear women's clothing. The Tanakama. So we'll say, now watch this. So now it turns out that there really is a fundamental machlokes about male hair removal. So we have one opinion that says male hair removal ultimately again is an Isser D'Oraisa. Okay? The Tanakama, Hailo Yilbash Gever Mai Darishve. So we'll say, what does the Tanakama do with this pasuk? So we'll say, this is incredible. He needs it for the following reason. We'll say, watch this. Lo yehe kli gever al isha. We'll say, so the pasuk says literally a kli gever. Now we'll say the way we just simply translate it is masculine clothing. Masculine clothing, right? So there should not be masculine clothing, male clothing on a woman. So we'll say, says the Gemara, my Talmud lomar. So ultimately, what is that teaching us? What is that teaching us? The Gemara says, Im shelo yilbash ish simlas isha, v'isha simlas ish, v'isha simlas ish. Im shelo yilbash ish simlas isha, v'isha simlas ish, hare kvar ne'amar toivahi. So we'll say, so now, one second. If it's to tell me that a man shouldn't wear women's clothing and a woman shouldn't wear man's clothing, the truth is we've already established that. Right? We've already spoken about that. And in fact, the Torah itself says that is a toiva. Because I just want to quote to you the pasuk. The pasuk that we're talking about over here, if you have the Torah or on the side, you can see it's Perek Chav Beis Pasuk Hey in Dvarim. The Torah says, Lo yilbash kli gever al isha, v'lo yilbash gever simlas isha. A man should not wear, right? Or literally again, the clothing of man should not be on a woman, and nor should a man wear the simla, the clothing of a woman. Ki toavas Hashem Elokecha olo seila. For it is a toiva. It is abomination whoever does these things. So we'll say, if you think about it, the pasuk itself is a little bit repetitive. Because it first says, Lo yeh kli gever al isha, right? Ultimately, again, a kli gever. And then simlas. So we'll say, what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says as follows. I will say, so the Gemara is just trying to understand, what are we talking about? Now, obviously, just want to point out, the pasuk is phrased both. So, literally, the clothing of a man should not be on a woman, and a man should not wear the clothing of a woman. Right? So, it's phrasing it both ways. So, look what the Gemara is doing over here. So, the Torah says, Hare kvar ne'amar to'iva. I will say, this is fascinating. Torah calls this an abomination. I will say, watch this Gemara. Ve'ein kan to'iva. So, the Gemara says, why is this an abomination? In other words, I understand why a man wearing women's clothing or a woman wearing man's clothing is not a good thing. I understand that. But toiva, abomination, is a very strong word. So I want to say, isn't this incredible? It's a very strong word. Like, toiva is reserved for like the worst kind of immoral behaviors. So, okay, bad, definitely bad, but why toiva? Rabbi says incredible Gemara. So the Gemara says, Ella, here it is. Shelo yilbash ish simlas isha. Rabbi says, because what's the prohibition? The prohibition is that a man should not wear women's clothing. V'yeshev bein hanoshim. And then Rabbi say what? Literally again, go into the women's locker room. Use women's restrooms. Right? In other words, Rabbi say, so the to'iva over here is going ahead and man dressing like a woman in order to go ahead and be with women. Similarly or conversely, the isha simlas ish, v'teshev bein ha'anoshim, and a woman to wear men's clothing in order to go ahead and dwell amongst them. That's the toeva. So I will say, it's fascinating. The toeva is not necessarily the cross-dressing. The toeva is utilizing the cross-dressing as a way to mingle immorally with the opposite sex. That's the toeva. Which I will say, I want to just tell you the incredible wisdom of the Ribono Shel Olam. I will say, and this is incredibly important just in terms of the way we apply to our modern sensitivities as well. People have all different types of proclivities, predispositions, wants, and desires. And just because you can't understand what someone else wants does not give you the right to stand in judgment of them. So we'll say, so there's a concept that people are going to do their thing. People are going to do their thing. And the truth is, each of us, we have our own problems. right? Each of us has our own problems and has our own things we have to deal with. And one should never go ahead and chas v'shalom look down or negatively portray another person because of their own lifestyle decisions. People have to make their own lifestyle decisions. Where it becomes problematic is when you try to impose those lifestyle decisions upon other people. That's when it becomes unfair. You want to do what you want, you can do what you want. I've got my own stuff going on. I'm going to take care of me. Right? I'm not going to stand in judgment of someone else. But the moment that suddenly, again, you take a decision and you foist it upon everyone else, and now everyone else has to accommodate, and everyone else has to, I'll say, that's when, okay, no, we can live and let live. We can live side by side, right? We can go ahead and figure out a way to accept people in all different kinds of ways. But no one has the right to foist something that is non-normative upon the rest of society. And even that's the Torah saying. This is fascinating. The Gemara is saying the to'eva is not on the act of a man dressing like a woman or a woman dressing like a man. The to'eva is when you try to take that and then go ahead and change the normative rhythms of societal life. That's the to'eva, because that's the fundamental undoing of the fabric of society. And I say it's such an incredible thing. In any event, so I'll say, so therefore, you thought Nazir wasn't going to get interested again, right? You thought we were done. Watch this. And I'll say, so now, let's go back to this. It says the Gemara. And I will say, I just want to point out, because I will say it is so incredibly important, because there's a distinction between what an individual chooses to do and how an individual chooses to live versus how that individual then interacts with greater society. Right? The mashal I often give is we'll say, some people have like a no shoe rule in their house. No shoe rule in their house. So you walk into their house, you have to take off your shoes. It doesn't matter if you're 2 years old or 25 years old. Right? I think it's a little weird. But Lamaisa, right? But Lamaisa says, can you imagine you come to someone's house, right? And they have a no shoe rule. That's it. And you say, no, I wear my shoes. I'm a shoe guy. I happen to have done that a couple of times, right? Right? But Lamaisa, I'm a shoe guy. Okay, that's fine. You could be a shoe guy all you want. But now you're in someone else's home. Right now you're entering into someone else's domain. There's a respect for the reality of the place in which you are entering. And to go ahead and say, no, I'm a shoe guy, and dafka say, I am entitled to walk wherever I want to walk because I am a shoe guy, that's gaiva. That's gaiva. Be who you want to be, but also respect the sensitivities of the other. Be who you want to be, but be careful about how you bring your personal hashkafa, so to speak, into the public realm. Incredibly important yisod. So Gemara says as follows: Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Eliezer ben Yaakov says, "Minayin shelo teitze isha b'kli zayin." So listen, now listen to this. This is actually incredible. How do you know that a woman is not allowed to walk around with a weapon? Right? A woman can't carry a weapon. Talmud lomar lo yiyeh kli gever al isha v'lo yilbash gever simas isha. So Moshe is incredible. The Torah, the Gemara understands the wearing of weaponry as a violation of cross-dressing. I will say, I will say, by the way, I do want to point out, there is an isser. I just want, just for the sake of intellectual clarity, there is an isser of a man wearing women's clothing and a woman wearing man's clothing, right? There is an isser that exists. Even if a man doesn't go ahead and go anywhere else, the point the Gemara is making over here is, what's the to'eva component of it? The isser d'oraisa is the isser d'oraisa. What's the to'eva component of it? So the to'eva component of it is dafka to try to engage in immoral practices. That's the to'eva piece. The isser is the isser. In any event, another interpretation of the isser is that a woman shouldn't walk around with weaponry. Now, boss, you have to understand something. So today, we look at the use of a weapon, right, as in a very utilitarian piece. Historically, often the wearing of a weapon was also like part of your accessories, right? In other words, right, we see this. See different cultures even today, right? Still, again, a dagger, a sword, or this, or that's part of the getup. That's part of the outfit. So the Gemara says that a woman having a weapon, a woman wearing a weapon, could be a violation of lo yilbash kever. Obviously, it's not talking about pikuach nefesh, right? It's not talking about, again, in a situation where there's a life-threatening situation, a woman has a weapon in order to safeguard her safety or to preserve her safety or her family, but talking about, again, more as an accessory. Okay? So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, "Talmud Omer lo yeh gever al ish lo yeh kli gever al isha v'lo yilbash gever simas isha shlo yitakin ish." I'm sorry, I just stopped. Talmud Omer lo yeh gever al isha v'lo yilbash gever skir shlo yitakin ish petikune isha. Ultimately, again, furthermore, it means that a man should not go ahead and adorn himself or literally engage in feminine practices. The Rebbe will say, what does he mean in feminine practices? So here, the Rush comments over here that it's a reference to the Rush says, Perush shlo yikcho v'lo yifarches v'lo yavar beis hashechi o beis ha'erva. He shouldn't put on blush, right? He shouldn't put on cosmetics, and he should not remove the hair of the armpits or of the pubic area. Okay, so the Gemara says, Rav Nachman ben Nazir mutter. Rav Nachman says, for a Nazir, he is permitted to remove all of his bodily hair. And I will say, now what's the pshat? What's the pshat of Rav Nachman? So I will say, Rav Nachman says, if you look at the Rush says, the chayvan, the megaleach kol rosho b'yom kilos neziruso leka tikun ishun ba'avaras beis hashech beis ha'erba. So Rav Nachman is of the opinion that since a Nazir is already going ahead and removing the hair of his head, so it's kind of like if people see him removing the rest of his bodily hair, they can figure, hey, maybe he just got like a good price on the barber or something. It's just like it's an all-in package. So in other words, it's not necessarily associated with feminine practices. And therefore, the Gemara says, the halacha does not follow Rav Nachman, and therefore, again, halacha l'maaseh, even a Nazir is not permitted to remove all of his bodily hair. Good, I'll say a couple of stories, interesting stories. So, Amri le Rabbanan Rabbi Shimon bar Abba. The Rabbanan said to Rabbi Shimon bar Abba, Chazil Rabbi Yochanan, the Leslie. We see that Rabbi Yochanan doesn't have any armpit hair. Rabbi Yochanan, so they were concerned, is Rabbi Yochanan going ahead and removing his armpit hair? So which we responded, no, it's because of old age, he's losing his hair, even his armpit hair. Okay? By the way, you'll wonder to yourself, why exactly is that story included over here? Let's say, so Lamaisa, remember again, there's a muster in everything. We say the muster in this is that there's a concept of Yisem Nikim. Yisem Nikim, I will say, means that your actions have to be beyond reproach. I will say that halacha l'maisa, even if at the end of the day, sometimes a person says, I don't care what anyone thinks. I know what I'm doing is right and that's all. That is an incorrect approach to life. You do have to care what other people think, and the truth is your actions should not only be appropriate, but your actions should look appropriate in the eyes of greater society as well. That's why the Gemara includes a story like this, to show you that here, people were looking at Reb Nachman. And again, it happened to be, there was a good reason for it, but Lamaisa, eyes were on him. Eyes are always on us. And therefore, our actions should ultimately reflect that. We'll say there was a guy who was going to be flogged. He had, whatever he did wrong. And he was going to get Malchus. And Rabbi Ami was going to be administering the Malchus. Igloi beis hashechi. So we'll say, remember, as part of Malchus, they pull down a person's clothing from his shoulders to his waist, right? In order, because they give Malchus of some on the front, some on the back. So as they were taking off his shirt, so what happened? Igloi beis hashechi. So Rabbi Ami saw the guy's armpits, and he saw he had hair in his armpits. Chazi de lo magalach. He saw that he did not shave his armpits. Rabbi Ami said, Shavke din min chavrehu. Leave this guy alone. Don't flog him, because ultimately, again, he's a good guy. Right? Why is he a good guy? He doesn't shave his armpits. In other words, I will say, it must be, just kind of backing into this story a little bit, right? It must be that it was very common for men to shave their armpits, right? And there was probably societal pressure to shave your armpits, right? You want to fit in, right? So shave your armpits if you want to fit in. This guy resisted this temptation, bepashtos, because he understood that there's an isser, whether it's a daraisa or derabanan, and because he didn't, ultimately, again, Rabbi Ami felt that this showed that this man possessed some level of piety, and because he possessed this level of piety, especially, again, sometimes the highest level of piety, I will say, is the ability to resist societal norms. Right? Isn't that an incredible idea? In other words, that's the idea. When you could say, the peer pressure and social pressure, everyone's doing it, right? Everyone's doing it, is one of the hardest things to resist. And if you could be the kind of person who's willing to kind of buck the trend, right? And I don't have to be the guy who does the same thing as everyone else, that's a high spiritual level. That's a high personal, moral level. So Rabbi Ami sees this guy who bucks the trend of armpit shaving, and he says, you know what? Good guy, and exempts him ultimately again from the milk. It's incredible. So what's the answer, Rabbi Chia? What's the halacha? What's the halacha with shaving? Right? Can you kind of now? They're asking him specifically again about the Beis Hashechi, Beis Ha'erva. Amar le aser. He said it's aser. Amar le vaha kagadol. Now the Rush understands what's happening over here. If you take a look at the Rush, vaha kagadol, v'hai my parich legachim misparayim d'Rabbi lo amar ela b'tar u'berish benotam vaha kagadol mitzarile. So we'll say, according to the Rush, the question that they're asking over here is, but sometimes a person has discomfort from armpit hair or from pubic hair. So sometimes a person is shaving it not because ultimately again of feminine practices, but of personal comfort. So I'll say, so doesn't that weigh in? Amarle Bar Pachsi said to him, son of nobility. Remember I said this is Rav is asking this of Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia responds back to Rav. Bar Pachsi is a compliment, right? Son of nobleman. Zman yeshlo lekol. Zman yeshlo kol zman shu godel no share. Right? So also listen to this. Zman yeshlo. Every hair has its time. In other words, it's incredible. In other words, essentially, what Rabbi Chia was saying was the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us is, yes, sometimes hair growth can become uncomfortable, but the way it works, specifically with these areas of the body, is when the hair would grow to such a point that it would become uncomfortable, usually it falls out. So literally translated, Zman yeshlo, every hair has its time, kol zman shu gadol no share. Right? To the point that it grows enough that it would cause discomfort, ultimately again it falls out. I will say, what a musar. What a musar. Every hair has its time. They'll say, if every hair has its time, right? So what does it mean? When it grows its course, I know this is a strange place to get a musar from, right? But right? When it goes ahead and grows its course and reaches its threshold, it falls out. They'll say, Alachas kama v'kama, if it's true for the hair, right? It's ultimately true for man as well, right? Kol adam yeshlo zman. Every single person has their time. And I will say, who knows how much time we have, how much time we don't have. All we know is that ultimately in the time that we have allotted, there is a mission to do. Because at a certain point in time, the hair falls out. At a certain point in time, ultimately life comes to an end. What a lesson to learn on Rosh Chodesh Nissan. A new month, new opportunities. Rabbi say, it is definitely time for us to get to work. So the Gemara goes weiter. What's an interesting shaila? So now Rabbi say, what we've established is that hair removal, specifically from the armpits and from the pubic area, is asr. Whether it's asr d'oraisa, asr d'rabbanan, right? It's asr. So the Gemara says, what about bebigdo? Right? So lachoch. Rabbi say, so lachoch means, if you take a look at the Rush, we'll say, what happens if a person goes ahead and rubs the hair, let's say with a garment, in order to remove the hair? So in other words, he's not removing the hair by hand. He's not removing, in other words, when I say by hand, not with scissors, not with a razor, but through friction. Through friction, what's the halacha there? So the Gemara says, Amar le aser. He says ultimately again it's aser. I should say this. Lochoch Rabosai means not with a beggar. Lochoch means ultimately again with scratching with his hand. So what if you go ahead and you sort of here? I'm not removing the hair with a razor or with scissors, but essentially scratching until the hair comes out. What's the halacha there? Amar le aser. He said that's aser. That's asar. Well, we'll say, why is that asar? Because that's still considered to be active hair removal. But big domahu, what about ultimately again with your beged? So that's what I was mentioning before. Beged means, what if you scratch the area with a beged till the hair comes out? Amar le mutter. Ultimately, again, that's going to be mutter. I will say alternate version of this, by minei b'tfila, the big domahu. So we'll say an alternate version of this was during davening. What's the halach? In other words, can a person scratch these particular areas with their beged? So Amar le aser. Ultimately, again, he said it is aser. I will say now for tefillah, this wouldn't just simply be an issue of hair removal. For tefillah, ultimately, again, it's also like the din in kavod tefillah. So what's the halacha? Aser, ultimately, again, it is aser v'les hilchos hakavosei, but the halacha does not follow this particular opinion. Therefore, I will say, technically speaking, scratching these areas of the body with your beged during davening technically would be mutter. I will say, I will just mention to you, the halacha is as follows. The halacha is the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea in Siman Kuf Pei Beis, because this is important. Halacha L'maisa says, Hama'avir Beis Seir Beis Hashechel Beis Ha'erva Afilu B'misparayim. So we'll say if a person removes hair from the armpits or from the pubic area with scissors, even with scissors, right? Ke'ein tar means you're cutting. In other words, we'll say you're using scissors close to the skin. So you're using scissors like a razor. So what's the halacha? Hayumakin oso makos mardus. It's an issur d'Rabbanan. Now we'll say, so again, if you purposely remove hair, ultimately again with a razor, we're talking about a man now, right? A man purposely removes hairs from the armpits or from the pubic area with a razor. That is an issur d'oraisa. Right? If you use scissors, even if you use scissors close to the skin, that will be an issur d'Rabbanan. Now I will say, this is talking about the use of scissors close to the skin. Let's say a person has unusual armpit hair growth, and he wants an armpit hair trim. Right? I don't know, okay? So l'maisa, again, it would sound like over here, that's mutter. The only time you get into an issur d'Rabbanan is when you're going to go ahead and cut it close to the skin with scissors. But I will say, that is the halacha. Now I will say, I want to point out over here, it says, B'makom shein ma'avirin ose ela noshim kedei shlo yitakin asmo tiko noshim. Shabbos says, it's interesting. But when is this so? This is only so if the armpit hair removal or pubic hair removal is something that is associated with women. But I will say, let's say societally, you lived in a place where everyone removes armpit hair. Shabbos say, we see from the Shulchan Aruch in that kind of situation, it would not be an issur, since it's no longer a feminine practice. We'll say, do you know where this comes up? The shaila actually does come up. Swimmers, right? Competitive swimmers who do shave their bodies. So there's a whole discussion halacha about, I don't know how many Jews are competitive swimmers, right? But Lamaisa again is there's a perfect example of it's not being done for feminine practices. It's actually being done to whatever amount of time it shaves off, like no pun intended, right? However amount of time, right, it takes off their final competition. It is a real thing. So that's a good example of where hair removal is not being done to mimic feminine practices. So I'll say that's where you get into a situation. Use of a razor to remove pubic hair, armpit hair is daraisa. Use of a scissor, ultimately again to go ahead and remove hair will be an issur d'Rabbanan. Okay, more to talk about with that. We'll say, but we'll have to go weiter. I'm a base. Okay, back to Nazir. Right, so it says, here we go. Meis echamer. So we'll say, let's go back to the previous Mishnah. Remember the previous Mishnah, right? Remember again, two Nazirim, Nazir A, Nazir B, walking together. What happens? Rabbi say, what happens? Reuven sees them. What does Reuven see? Reuven says, one of you guys became tamei. What doesn't Reuven know? What doesn't he know? Who became tamei? So Rabbi say, so the Gemara gave a whole process there. So remember again, what do we do? We wait 30 days. So we'll say very quickly, what do? We wait 30 days, and then after 30 days, they both shave their head, and they bring two karbanos, right? A carbon betuma, carbon tara, right? And then essentially what do? They go ahead and, right, we'll say Nazir one says, listen, if I'm the tar Nazir, this is, right, the carbon tara is mine, the carbon tuma is yours. Right? If I'm the tamei Nazir, the carbon tuma is mine, the carbon tara is yours. They wait another 30 days. After 30 days, what do? They bring a carbon tara. And they repeat the process, right? And it says, if I was tamei before, that carbon tuma was mine, the carbon tara was mine, and now this carbon tara is mine. And if I was tahar, that carbon tara was mine, the carbon tuma was yours, and this carbon tara is yours. Fine. Actually, a pretty straightforward case. Here's the wrinkle. We'll say Mishnah, Nun Tasma Beis. Here we go. Get ready. Meis echameyan. Oh, okay. Now I'll say, now what happens? Let's say, one of the Nazirim in question died. He died. Now we'll say, let's say again, so it's the same case. Two Nazirim walking down the street, minding their own business, right? Reuven sees them from a distance. Reuven comes running over and says, listen guys, one of you is tamei, I don't know who. What happens? I will say, so again, one of the Nazirim is so in shock from being in tamei. What happens? He dies. All right, so we'll say, so now what do we do? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehoshua says, no problem. Yevakish echad ben ashok, sheyidar kinegdo ben Nazir. Rabbi Yehoshua says, no problem. Just go and find another guy. Go and find another guy in the marketplace who's willing to become a Nazir. Essentially, again, you're going to get yourself a stand in Nazir. So we'll say, see, the problem is you kind of need this because you have a sisovic tumah, right? So find another guy who's willing to become a Nazir, right? And then I will say, essentially, same process as before. Va'omer, and you should say as follows. Now, the only difference in this case over here is the stand in Nazir, you know for sure that what? He's not Tameh. So watch this. How does the process unfold? So va'omer, im Tameh hayisi, so let's call it Reuven and Shimon were the original Nazirim. Right? So Reuven and Shimon are walking, right? Levi comes running over, and Levi says, I saw one of you guys become Tameh. Okay? So they're about to begin the process. Shimon drops dead. Shimon dies. So we'll say, so what happens? Reuven goes to the shuk, right? Puts out a wanted sign, need a stand-in Nazir. So now let's say you have stand-in. So now you have Reuven and stand-in. So what happens? Now, so stand-in is going to observe 30 days. So 30 days later, what happens? Reuven says, in Tameh hayisi, right? Reuven says, if I am Tameh, hare ata Nazir miyad. So this is what Reuven says to stand-in as soon as stand-in comes about, right? So right? Shalom aleichem, stand-in. Here's the deal. If I'm Tameh, Reuven says, if I'm Tameh, then you are a Nazir immediately. Right? You're a Nazir immediately. Vim tar hayisi, but if I'm tar, hare ata Nazir achar shloshim yom. You will only become a Nazir when? 30 days from now. Okay, now we'll say, now remember, that being said, because we never know what's fully going on, stand-in will have to observe the halachos of Naziris as of when? No. Immediately, because he has no idea, am I a Nazir now, or am I a Nazir 30 days from now? Because everything is dependent on the tumah of Reuven, which is sisovic. So therefore, Abba say, essentially, stand-in is going to have to begin to observe the halachos of Naziris as of now. Fine. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Now, what happens next? The sofer shloshim yom. We wait 30 days. Let's say after 30 days, again, hair cutting. Mavian carbon tum of a carbon tara. Now, I will say, essentially, repeat the same process. We're going to bring two sets of karbanos. One set of karbanos for a Nazir bituma, and one set of karbanos for a Nazir bitara. Va'omer. And Reuven who's Nazir number one, says, Imani hu tameh, if I'm the one who became tameh, karban tuma shali, the karban tara shalcha, then the karban tuma is mine, and stand-in, you now also became a Nazir over the last 30 days, and therefore the karban tara is yours. V'im anihu atar, but Reuven says, if I was the tar, and Shimon, the now deceased Nazir, was the tameh, then ultimately karban tara shali, the karban tara is mine, the karban tuma b'safek. Wow. So now watch this, what happened. And the karban tumah was just brought b'safek. Now remember again, I know what you're thinking to yourself. You're thinking to yourself, karban b'safek, you're not allowed to bring a karban b'safek. So I'll say, this is an interesting exception to this rule. Now remember again, the karban tumah of a Nazir is made up, remember again, of a chatas ha'of, an olas ha'of, and a keves that's brought for an asham. So we'll say, now listen to this. Normally, chatas can't be brought misafek. The one exception to this rule is chatas ha'of. Fascinatingly enough, the olas ha'of, ultimately, and when it's brought b'safek, it's brought as an adava, and ultimately, again, the asham is not brought. So the asham is the one thing you leave off. But the chatas ha'of can be brought misafek, the olas ha'of is brought in adava. That's how you reconcile this whole thing. Incredible. The sof, I will say we're not finished. The sofrim, shloshim yom, we count another 30 days, umavian karban tara, and ultimately, again, we'll bring the karban tara. Va'omer, and he says, we'll say now 30 days later, Reuven says, Imani tameh, if I was tameh, karban tuma shali, karban tara shalcha. So if I was tameh, then the karban tuma that we brought beforehand, that was mine. The karban tara that we brought beforehand, that was yours. And the karban tara that we're bringing now, tara si, it's mine. V'mani atar, but ultimately, again, if I was the one who was tar before, then what? Karban tara shali, the karban tara was mine. The karban tuma b'safek, and the karban tara, we'll say, remember again, which is made up again of the chatas ha'of, the olas ha'of, and the keves la'asham. So remember again, the chatas was brought misafek, the olas ha'of was brought in the dava, and the keves, right, the asham was not brought at all. So that'll be safek. The zeh karban taras, and this will be your karban. Good. We'll say, so it seems to work. It's pretty solid. It's Rabbi Yehoshua. Amr Ben Zoma says, 1 second. Umi shomea lo sheyadar kinegda b'yazir. How in the world are you going to find this guy? Right? In other words, so Ben Zoma says, who in their right mind is agreeing to this? That was, of course, the simple answer always is, if you pay enough, right, you'll get someone to do anything, right? But Lamaisa, so Ben Zoma is just questioning. It's interesting. Ben Zoma is just questioning the practicality of Rabbi Yeshua's approach. Practically, how are you going to get someone to do this? So Gemara says, Ella, maybe chatas of va'olas behema. So rather, Ben Zoma says, here's what you should do. Bring the chatas off, which Rabbi say again, that's the chatas for Tumah. Bring the olas off, right? Bring the olas off. Rabbi say, olas off, ultimately again is the carbon for Tara. So va'omer. So Ben Zoma is suggesting something different. Ben Zoma is saying ultimately again, when you go ahead and you have this Safek case, and one of the Nazirim died, don't get another Nazir. Rather, I will say, surviving Nazir, here's what you do. Bring your Chatas Auf, which represents the carbon for potential Tumah. Bring your Olas Behema, which represents ultimately, again, the carbon for Tara. V'omer, here's what you say. Im Tamei Ayisi, HaChatas Mechavasi. If I'm Tamei, the Chatas ultimately should be for my obligation. Va'ola Nidava. And the Ola Behema is in a Dava. V'im Tar Ayisi. And if I'm Tar, Ha'ola Mechavasi. Let the Ola be for my obligation. V'chatas misafek. And also, as we said before, chatas ha'of can be brought misafek, and that's it. V'sofer shloshim yom, count for another 30 days. Or maybe carbon tara, bring your carbon matara. V'omer, and here's what you should say. Im tamei ayisi, if I was tamei, ha'olah rishon adava, the first olah should be in a dava. V'zu chova, and this should be my obligation. V'im tar ayisi, and if I was tar, ha'olah rishon chova, the first olah should be my obligation. V'zu nadava, and this should be my nadava. V'zu shar karbani, and these are the rest of my karbanos. Rabbi Yeshua, so again, so therefore, so Ben Zoma is of the opinion you could manage this situation without a stand-in. Without a stand-in. Amar, so the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, Nimsa zeh maybe karbanos of the chatzoim. Rabbi Yeshua says, but here's the problem. Ben Zoma, here's the problem. The problem is you're never bringing all of your karbanos at one time, right? The karbanos are split up in 2 stages, which it seems to be Rabbi Yeshua saying is problematic. Despite this objection, the Chachamim agreed with Ben Zoma that Ben Zoma's approach, ultimately again of one person bringing different karbanos at different stages, is a better approach than finding a stand-in Nazir. I will say quickly, just finish the Gemara. I says the Gemara, so let him bring it. I don't understand what's the problem. Rabbi Yeshua wasn't actually voicing an objection. In other words, Rabbi Yeshua was saying, but you're bringing your karbanos at 2 different stages. Who cares? Let him do that. What exactly is the problem? To which Gemara says, you're right. Rabbi Yeshua wasn't really voicing an objection. Rabbi Yeshua was just trying to sharpen the Talmidim. Rav Nachman, Ma'ili Avele Rabbi Yeshua, Ledaki Dilo Lisru. So we'll say ultimately again, so Rav Nachman says, no. What was the problem? What ultimately again was the issue that Rabbi Yeshua had? Rabbi Yeshua's issue was that Allah Lamaisa, if you have 2 Nazirim, we'll say, here was what I'm concerned about. The final karbanos are only going to be brought after Giluach, after the actual shaving. The problem is if you have 2 Nazirim, you have to wait for 2 shavings. What was Rabbi Yeshua really concerned about? Rabbi Yeshua was concerned that Allah Lamaisa, while you're waiting for the 2 shavings, the sacrificial parts that have to be offered up on the Mizbeach will go putrid, and that's problematic. That's how Rabbi Yeshua really objected. So we'll say, Halacha Lamaisa, the Rambam does in fact adopt the approach of Ben Zoma. So when you have the situation of the Safek Tumah case, and one of the Nazirim dies, you will not have to find a stand-in Nazir. Rather, the surviving Nazir essentially offers up staggered karbanos at 2 30-day intervals. I will say, Shkoyach.